June 28th, 1987. Well, I did it. Today I put my big girl panties on and I did it. No one wanted me there. I don't think anyone's wanted me in this town since John died. I'm a troublemaker because I talk about it. Kicked out of the Garden Society. Kicked out of the PTA. Well, they have to take me. I'm a tax-paying citizen. I'm owed my right to speak. So at today's town hall, I let everyone jaw on about their bake sales and their Canada Day plans, and then I stood up and let them have it. Why do we allow our family to die on Christmas Eve, diary? You should have seen their faces. Stricken. The lot of them. I went down the line. Listed the names of everyone in that room who had someone stolen on Christmas Eve. Asked them how they liked their empty coffins. I even turned around and asked the mayor if he was willing to donate someone to the cause this year. After all, the town stands there and does nothing. The mayor's practically co-signing it. Oh, I was escorted out, but it was worth it. September 15th, 1990. Allison moved out today. She's starting her new life. After we dropped her off at the airport, we went straight for the hardware store. I wanted this done years ago, but Stuart wanted to wait until the kids were gone, so it didn't make them uncomfortable. Tonight he blocks up the chimney. Those soulless vultures will never step foot in this home again. December 25th, 1990. It worked. Oh, the neighbors gave us the hairy eye when they saw Stuart hauling cement to the roof, but he never stopped. If ever the town gossiped about us before they did it double time the moment we shut that hellhole up. Probably tripled when we barred the windows. Stuart's friend is a physician. We did it right. Tested it for weeks. Figured out just how much we need to inject to go to sleep quickly and not meet God. Sounds crazy, but you need a backup plan. Then on Christmas Eve, we drew the curtains and waited. Once the sound started, I just about turned into a teenager again. I shook so bad the bed vibrated. Stuart had to hold me in place. We heard them on the roof, crawling around like the vermin they are. Then they tried the chimney. Oh, they scratched around like cats in the dirt. Then they just moved on, left. Later we heard the distant screams of someone not asleep. I don't know if we'll stay up every year. I don't think I can handle hearing the poor souls as they take them. But I feel a sense of peace knowing they won't come into my home ever again. January 18th, 1991. We're pariahs now. Well, mostly me. Stuart still has his friends. No one wants to talk to me. They blame me for influencing him. Stuart stands up for me. No one will say anything in front of him, but I hear it. Whispers. Gossip. We're selfish. Hurting the town already took too much from me. They can suffer. I won't play this game anymore. There were dozens more entries. I wrote out the ones that seemed to be the most interesting. Rosie's husband died just a couple years later. With him gone, the only way to get any work done in her home was to hire someone outside of the town. No one said hello. No one visited. There were no casseroles when she was sick. No one to mow her lawn. Reading Rosie's diary, I learned just how cruel our town could be. We were probably the first people to go visit her in years. I brought the notebook with me the next day when I dragged Ella out to the town square. I wanted to see the tree. The town still put up a gigantic tree every Christmas. I'd stopped going, but my parents still dragged my sister there every year. Honestly, everyone sort of dragged themselves there every year. The lighting of the tree was a big event that kicked off the whole Christmas season. People are jerks, Ella said, reading while we walked. It looks like people left letters in her mail slot for years. That's how she got all this. No one would talk to her, but she was the only one they could tell. I elbowed her and we both came to a halt, looking up at the heavily decorated Christmas tree just a few feet in front of us. How the hell did they manage to decorate that much tree? It must have had hundreds of ornaments on it. It's beautiful, she whispered, in awe for a moment, before her face fell. Christmas isn't the same, is it? I shook my head. No, it wasn't. It would never be the same. I spotted a worker adjusting the garland on a light post nearby. "Hey, the tree looks awesome," the man beamed with pride. I could feel the bile rise in my throat. "Where do you guys get such a huge tree? It's massive." "Raleigh's Tree Farm," he announced with a grin. "Best trees in the country." It didn't take long to Google Maps up the location of Raleigh's Tree Farm. Ella and I went to get Max. Greg wasn't talking to us and borrow his truck for the 40-minute drive out of town. The tree farm itself didn't seem like a regular farm so much as a big-ass forest surrounded by fence. A fading billboard with a chipmunk dressed as Santa announced our arrival. I guess that was Raleigh. "Wait, stop," Ella said as we got out. She dug around in her bag before pulling out a wrapped bundle of sage and a lighter. "My grandma gave this to me. I'm supposed to use it when I feel like the energy is off. The energy is definitely off here." She lit the bundle until it smoked, then started to swirl it around herself before motioning me over. I paused, not really big on superstitions. "Isn't that bad for our lungs?" I asked. Ella looked at me like I was nuts. It probably wasn't a great argument, all considering. Max shoved me aside and held his arms out. "Heck, man, Ella's Nan is like 100% Native American." I'm like, trusting the old lady. "Load me up." Max stood there relishing in his own spiritual experience until Ella pointed the lighter at me. "Fine," I muttered, stepping forward and letting her blow the smoke on me. I don't even know why I balked. We were at a tree farm on the trail for the truth about people stealing Christmas spiders. I probably needed to bathe in the stuff morning, noon, and night. After getting right, we walked around outside of the fence, searching for a way in. The giant chipmunk hadn't indicated any business hours, so it didn't seem like it was the type of place people just went to buy a tree. I figured they must have wholesaled to those tree sellers you see in parking lots. They were the spirit Halloween of Christmas. That and hickory farms. Eventually we found a gate. It was locked, with a big chain looped around it. I pulled on the lock. "Oh, that's secure," Max scoffed, yanking on the chain. The chain was so long that if you tugged the gate far enough, you could just slide under and through. We all made our way through and started to trudge through the many rows of trees. We trudged. Threw a couple snowballs, laughed and joked. Then trudged some more. We kept hiking through trees, and even more trees. "Where are the big trees?" Ella finally asked, saying what we were all thinking. We'd been walking through dozens of average-looking trees for the last 20 minutes with no giants in sight. Not even a leftover stump. The tree farm was huge. If they grew giant trees like the one in our town square, I couldn't see where. All you could see were what looked like hundreds of normal trees, packed with snow. There weren't any workers. No sign of an office. Heck, Max broke our silence and chased it with what I can only describe as a shriek. Then he was gone. Ella and I panicked. One minute we were all turning and looking at the world of evergreen around us. The next, Max poofed. "Hayden." "Ella." We could hear him. Ella chased our footprints in the snow and started following his, stepping wide around each dragging footprint he had left behind. "Max," she called, and I followed her. "Max." "I'm good." Suddenly we saw his hand waving above the snow line. We got to the edge of a cliff. Well, kind of. Max had fallen off the edge of some sort of sharp hill, which luckily wasn't a drop to his death. Just an awkward drop out of view. Ella crouched down and I peered over the edge. He'd fallen into a fluffy snow pile and was laughing awkwardly, red in the face. My grandma always says I need to look where I'm going more. I couldn't help but heave a big sigh of relief. Then Ella smacked me in the chest. "Ow." "Jesus, why?" Oh, she'd pulled her mitt off and was pointing. I followed her finger down to a huge clearing below. In the middle of it stood a giant spruce tree. It had to be 80 feet tall. Do they even grow that big? I wondered. Hey, Ella was over the edge. Max fell off and jumping down the next one. I got down beside Max and helped him up before reluctantly starting to follow Ella down the steep hill. Eventually we managed to scoot down the last part on our butts, but it was a cold and long climb, and I wasn't looking forward to going back up. Like, how do they get these trees out of here? Max asked before nearly walking straight into a massive construction crane. Ella just groaned and I shook my head. Beside the towering spruce was a wide stump left behind from what we assumed was the tree in our town square. I walked around it, counting my steps absently and watching Ella put her hand on it. It's warm. It's pulsing. I joined her, putting both my palms on the leftover wood, feeling the strange warmth emanating from it. She was right. It was pulsing. I could feel the odd thwump, 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 thwump that felt like it came from somewhere deeper. You couldn't see it move, but you could feel it, almost like a heartbeat. This one's warm too. Max was standing under the other tree, touching the bark. Maybe that's like why there's no snow here. We looked around. A perfect circle had formed around the tree and the stump, going out maybe 20 feet. Despite the rest of the tree farm being packed with the thick white stuff, the ground around the giant tree and its lost brother was damp and bare, even green in places. Only the very top of the tree itself seemed to have snow pillowed on its branches. Whoops! Max had been walking around the tree when he kicked something accidentally. Ella and I went over to check it out. Tucked beneath the tree on one side was a pile of oranges. I crouched down and picked one up. There were oranges, nuts, a couple pomegranates, and candy. Guys, this is weird, right? Max held up an empty 4-liter jug of milk. We all stared at it. Who just left an empty jug of milk in a tree farm of all places? I think we should leave, Ella said suddenly. She'd found the lid to the milk jug a few steps away, and beside it was one of those bear-shaped squeeze bottles of honey. It was empty, and like the lid to the milk, the opening was in shreds. I don't want to be here after dark. And we need to clean up. I'd never heard her sound so panicked before. I was confused, but I wasn't about to argue, and both Max and I helped her put the fruit and nuts back. We made the pile as neat as we could before we started back up the hill. The climb absolutely sucked. Getting down had been easy. Getting back up was a nightmare. The snow was knee-deep in some places, and we never knew where the ground really was. It took the three of us dragging each other across the snow for a full hour to climb back up to the main tree farm. By the time we crossed that final ledge, I felt my own sense of panic growing. I'd turn around and see nothing behind us, but that didn't stop it from feeling like something was just waiting for one of us to fall. I don't think we even stopped to catch our breath until we got in the truck and were driving away. Back in town, we stopped at Joe's place, a little diner with a clear view of the tree in town square. We ordered burgers and milkshakes. When Max got up to go to the bathroom, Ella pulled out Rosie's notebook. She flipped through until she found an empty page at the back, then pulled out a pen and started sketching. I watched her draw the billboard, the clearing, and the spot where one tree stood and one tree was missing. She drew the little pile of stuff Max had kicked over, making a diagram of every item. Then she drew something else, on the tree still standing. "What's that?" I asked, struggling to really eat my food. "You didn't see?" she asked, and I shook my head while she frowned. That tree was filled with spider webs. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I felt like I was going to drift off, I'd feel my skin crawl, like 100 little legs were brushing against me. It was all in my head, of course, and at some point I must have slept because I woke up with a jolt the next day. The idea that Greg told his parents about the whole drugged on Christmas Eve thing had freaked us all out. The only good thing was that no one really likes Greg's parents. I mean, they're not bad people. They're just really, really religious, the fire and brimstone kind, and it always seeps into every conversation. So while we were worried that they might start sharing with our parents, they never seemed to. After the tree farm, we waited until his parents were definitely at work to go knock on his door. If we were going to take this on, we needed all of us together. Thankfully, we'd been friends since elementary school. We knew Greg. Anytime he got upset, he needed a couple days to stew, and then he was cool. So when we filled him in on the tree farm, he was eager to join us in the town square. We wanted a closer look at the tree. "So my parents were right?" he asked, sounding as shocked as we were. "Kind of," I admitted with a shrug. "I think so anyways. I mean, can you explain how Mrs. Alps has run a store called the Button Emporium for 20 years in this place?" I couldn't. No one bought that many buttons in this town. I think I saw my mother go in there once. I'd have guessed that she was selling buttons online, but Mrs. Alps didn't even seem to own a computer. "Okay, but have you ever seen anyone doing anything shady like that? It feels like we should be seeing people in robes, around a bonfire at midnight, that kind of stuff. Real cult nonsense." "We kind of do though," Ella suggested as we came to the tree. "What happens at the start of every December?" "Everyone comes to worship the tree," I said, almost in a whisper. I thought about every Christmas I'd been alive for. At the start of December, the town decorated the tree and everyone got together for the big light-up. Hundreds of people gathered to clap for it. People sang carols, passed around snacks. New parents introduced their babies to the tree like the hecking Lion King. "I don't see anything," Ella announced, sounding disappointed as she made her way around the tree. Max had been checking too and shook his head. None of us found any spider webs. It was disappointing in a way. Guys," Greg called, waving an arm at us. "Guys," he was tapping the notebook, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Okay, you guys remember when I had my goth phase?" Oh, we all remembered. "Weren't you like really into Ozzy? You like carried a plastic bat around." Middle school was a little weird for all of us, I guess. Greg rolled his eyes and shoved Max away. Yeah, well, I was really into witchcraft and nonsense then. I wanted to piss my parents off. I got all these books on the occult, right? I actually read them. All of them. Most of it was really long and boring. "Speed it up, man," Ella said, spinning her finger in the air, to which Greg shot her a dirty look. "Yes, this stuff beneath the tree. This is 100% an offering." We all exchanged looks. "An offering?" "On to fairies," he hissed with eyes as wide as saucers. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. "Fairies now? Oh God. I was going to graduate school and get shipped straight to the loony bin. I might as well buy the jacket now." "Just to be clear, like Tinkerbell nonsense?" I asked between chuckles. My little sister had dressed up as one for Halloween a couple years ago. It was cute. I couldn't imagine how it had anything to do with the spiders, though. "No, man. I mean real fairies. Every country has their own stories, right? They call them the Fae, and they can be really hecked up. That pile of stuff, the milk and honey, that's classic. That's like the most basic nonsense you'd give." By now, people were staring at Greg's arm, waving, so we hustled away. "Okay, so why would Raleighs be making offerings to fairies?" I asked. "To grow big trees." "Nah, man, that would be a waste. Nature, spirits, and nonsense would take care of the trees." "He's not wrong," Ella mumbled, already on her phone. "Milk and honey is old school. It's the first thing they suggest if you want to appease them or make a deal." We all stopped. "A deal?" I asked. "What kind of deal?" "The kind that like runs a button shop." Max pointed at the store we'd ended up in front of. Even though it was cold out, I felt beads of sweat dripping down my back. The Button Emporium. My mother's flower shop. Ella's mom was a real estate agent in a town that frankly didn't have a lot of buying and selling going on. Most of the houses that were empty were rentals owned by the town itself. The more I looked around and thought about it, the more fun house vibes it gave off. You leave the offerings wherever the Fae are said to live, like gardens or fairy circles, she read aloud, and then blanched. I thought about the circle of melted snow surrounding the spot where those two giant trees grew. That definitely had to be a fairy circle. Plus the trees were just weird, warm and humming. The trees. And I spun around and started jogging back to the town square. In that moment, it was like the whole world faded around me. I could hear my friends calling me, but it was warped, like the sound came from underwater. All I could think of, all I could see was that towering Christmas tree. It glittered under the weight of hundreds of ornaments, garland, and tinsel. I pushed past people as I made my way right to the tree, digging in my pocket for the one thing I knew could solve all of this fire. In one smooth move, I flicked open my lighter and held it up to the tree's glistening branches. I could hear screaming behind me, people shrieking for help. I held fast, plunging the flame into the tree. I held out as long as I could before a security guard body slammed me into the ground. It was embarrassing being picked up by my dad at the police station later that day. Even worse was listening to my dad and Ella's chief of police father having a heart-to-heart. Then I had to watch him shake his head sadly at me as he unlocked the holding cell. The drive home was pure suffering. Lectures about what it means to be a man, about how community is important, please, and how I needed to set a good example for my sister. We got home, and I heard everything again from my mother. Then I was sent to bed. I shut my door and put my headphones on. I didn't want to listen to them debate about what to do with me. I felt sick enough as it was. All I could think about was that tree. It didn't even get hot. It was like the flame just bent around it. My parents wouldn't take their eyes off me for days, and the closer it got to Christmas, the more freaked out I got. I didn't even have Rosie's notebook. Greg had been reading it when I went to burn down the tree. I had no phone. My dad blocked all social media on our router. All I could do was hang out with my sister and be festive. At least that's what they thought. I did have my computer. I was supposed to do some school project during winter break, but I spent the time doing more research. I used a VPN to email anything I found to my friends. I started to dig into the newspaper again. Rosie had said that the town hated her for closing up their fireplace, and that an ordinance had been put in place against it. She was right. The newspaper published minutes from the town meetings. Several families had closed up their fireplaces after the Walshes had. It was a big hecking deal at the time. Even worse, in 1992, the town had an economic collapse. The mill shut down, and several families lost their jobs. In 1993, the mayor decreed that a working fireplace was required for all new houses, and that any changes to existing fireplaces and their chimneys was a violation of the town's heritage status. The town even offered free renovations for anyone willing to open their chimneys again. More insidious than that was when the town started a campaign to have new families move to the area. The mayor had hired some big city design firm to handle it. If we were right, someone had made a deal ages ago for the success of the town. The rules were pretty simple, and the consequences severe. When I looked up obituaries from Christmas 1991, there weren't any. So the Fae, or whatever they are, never got their sacrifice that year. That mill never reopened. Ever. To this day, the building is abandoned. Kids don't even go out there to drink. It was no wonder the mayor went all out to try and fix it. When I finally got my phone back, we were just a couple days away from Christmas Eve. Ella convinced my parents to let me go over to her house, using her father's status as a police officer as part of her good influence strategy. It worked. My dad dropped me off at her house, and after an awkward hello with her parents, Ella dragged me down to the basement. "So what's the plan?" I asked once the door shut behind us. I was itching to finalize our attack strategy. Last supper. I looked around. Greg and Max were already there, waving from the couch. In front of them were a stack of pizzas and a PS4 hooked up to the TV. Ella saw the look on my face and elbowed me, nudging me down the stairs. I sat down, looking around and wondering why it felt so casual. "Drink up," she announced, plunking down a case of pop on the table. Ella. Can't we just pour it out? Greg asked, staring at bottle after bottle of Coke. It was all glass bottles and there were a lot. I said drink, she ordered, grabbing one and opening it. We all quickly followed her lead. After I got a slice of pizza in hand, Greg opened up the notebook and spread out a map of the city. He pointed at the town square. A tiny drawing of a tree had been added in green marker. That tree? That's their totem. Or something. We think it's connected to the other tree in the circle. It's like a gateway that lets the spiders come through. Ella sat there chugging an entire bottle of Coke before wiping her mouth and grabbing a bucket of rags and tossing it in the middle of the table. The tree didn't burn, right? It's probably protected by some kind of magic. So we take out the spiders instead. They're like the worker bees. They have to be weak once they're outside of the nest. We lure them in here. She tapped the map with some scissors before starting to cut the rags into strips. The Smith's house, I asked, realizing where they'd marked the next spot. It's empty. No one's rented it yet. I can get the keys off the realtor lockbox. Max is going to set up his sound system inside. Those things go after anyone awake, right? In nature, spiders use vibration to hunt. That's got to be how those things know who's awake. So we lure them in. We gas the house. We light it on fire. Boom. Dead spiders. I sat back and ate, thinking about the possibility of it all working. I was thinking about what would happen to our little town. The last time no one was taken, the mill shut down. It destroyed lives. I'm not stupid. I listen when my dad watches the news. The world economy kind of sucks right now. A lot of people would kill to be in our situation. We were basically dooming everyone in our town if we did this. If we do this, our lives are never going to be the same. Our parents will all probably lose their jobs. I know, Ella said after a moment of silence. She sat back and looked around at the trophies that dotted the walls. I'm probably going to lose my scholarship. She'd already been pre-accepted to a university on a sports scholarship that frankly she had never even applied to. My dad's radio repair shop wouldn't survive. Max was already planning to blow up thousands of dollars in speakers. Max shrugged, opening another bottle of pop. But it's not like it's ours, right? It's fake. It's always been fake. Greg nodded his agreement, looking equally solemn. We all felt the weight of what we were about to do. We tried to go talk to the Millers. It didn't work. They called the cops on us, something about hazing. But when we were there, we saw their kids. They're all like under 6. What if one of the kids is taken, or the parents? And then whoever's left has to look after 3 kids. Is my scholarship worth someone's life? Ella shook her head. I thought about it. It's all just bribes. Everything we have is bribes, so we look away. I don't want to look away anymore. Whoever we're feeding needs to go hungry. I grabbed another bottle of pop and picked up a rag and some scissors. Ella was right. Rosie was right. I had been right. We had to do this. By the way, what's all this for? I asked, wondering why we were cutting up scraps and guzzling Coke. Molotovs, Greg answered with a grin. Christmas Eve came, and that's when I posted the first part of our story. I hit submit, and then packed my backpack full of everything I'd need for the night. Then I sat down to wait. It was probably the worst I've ever felt on a Christmas Eve. Every step in the same weird ritual my family does every year put me closer to the big event, and I had to pretend to enjoy it. My parents were already edgy. So were my friends' parents after the harassment episode with the Millers. We all had to play it cool. So I choked down dinner. Put on this year's pajamas, candy cane reindeer, if you're wondering, and sat down to everyone's favorite movie. Then at 8:15, we all took our magic pills, and just like last year, I saved mine to spit in the toilet. I went to bed, my jeans riding up under the pajamas. When I finally heard snoring, I checked my parents' and sister's rooms before taking off my PJs and grabbing my bag. Then I booked it, only pausing just for a moment to stick a couple of those fire pokers straight up the chimney. The first thing I did was steal the key from the realtor box on the Smith's house. We'd already dropped off all of Max's equipment and set it up. We set up the speakers, lugged in jugs of gasoline, and set up whatever traps we could. Half the house was a death trap by Christmas Eve. One wrong step and you were liable to have a bucket of knives drop down on you. There were even ball bearings set to explode from corners. We really didn't want to take any chances when it came to killing the spiders. Max got there first, getting to work on finishing any wiring and starting the process of stringing the extensions across the street to my house. Greg and Ella followed after. They brought the fire, lugging in a cooler filled with Molotovs just ready to light. Ella had her baseball bat, and Greg, well, Greg. "What's that?" I asked, staring at the thing he had strapped to his back. My dad's nail gun, Greg beamed, whipping it around so I could take a better look at it. "Fairies don't like iron, right? I got the cheapest nails I could find. I made sure they got all rusty too. It sounded like a good idea, at least." Next we tested the sound system, Max operating things from across the street in my living room. Somehow I picked the short straw and had to stand in the house, walkie in hand. "Okay, get ready." Guys, I hecking hit the deck. It sounded like a gunshot right next to me. I swear the whole house rattled off its frame when the music hit. "Nope, sounds crackly," the walkie gargled out. Crackly. I crawled to my feet and watched as Max scampered across the snow to tweak a little something in the speakers. What the hell was that? My super mix. I worked on this for days after Max was happy. We drenched the house in gasoline, scarves over our mouths as the stench filled the air and made us all lightheaded. Then we waited. Went back to my house, checked the time, and sat around waiting. Ella laughed at the people calling me out for hating It's a Wonderful Life. We all agreed we wished the military would get involved. Then we just sort of settled down in the grim silence, listening. It took another hour before the first signs of life appeared. Ella noticed it first, pointing out the window and peering down the street. The first of the creatures were making their way to the rooftops on our street. I lived just a few blocks away from the town square, so we figured they would hit my block early. The Millers lived way farther out. If we could lure them all in before they even got out there, then no one would have to die at the Millers. We held out for a few painful minutes, watching the spiders file across the roofs. They went in groups of 3, just like Rosie said. It was terrifying, and although I'd seen them before, it was the expressions reflected on the faces of my friends that just added to my fear. I think they were all still hoping that I was crazy. I was too. Deep inside me, I hoped that we'd all just sort of made this up. Max, Greg whispered while we all sat there in slack-jawed awe. "Max," now he hissed, and Max suddenly came to life, stuttering a little as he moved to his controls. A couple dials turned and a finger on the start button, and the Smith's house came to life. It was crazy. The whole town was dead silent except for us. I was amazed the windows didn't break, it was so loud. I sat there holding my breath as the bass vibrated the whole block. For a moment the spiders didn't seem to notice anything. They dropped into chimneys like usual. Then suddenly it was like the reverberations hit. Like one mass migration, they all started to move. Have you ever seen those horrible videos of someone poking a daddy long legs nest? It was like that, only red. It's working. They were all hopping down the chimney, almost fighting each other to be first. Creature after creature poured into the house. "Ella, you're up," Max said, passing her a bottle and a lighter. "Greatest pitcher in the province, right?" She nodded, lighting up the homemade Molotov and then sneaking out the front door. By now the house had to be bursting. We couldn't see any spiders outside of it. She threw the bottle with all she had, and it smashed through the front room window. We'd soaked the place with so much gasoline and kindling that the place went up like a match. We stood outside my house, listening to Max's music mix at concert volume and watching spiders trying to escape the trap. We could hear explosions going off from inside the house. For a moment we stood there and cheered. It felt like we'd beaten whatever hecked-up enemy we were battling. The spiders that crawled out of the place collapsed and fizzled beneath the flames. The tree might not have been flammable, but they sure were. Just as we started to debate on how we were going to explain the mess, Ella smacked me hard in the chest again. "Look," she yelped. There were more spiders coming. Fresh spiders. New spiders. Pouring out of the town square and coming straight for us. Run. We dove into Max's truck, and he peeled away on the frosty road, driving blindly in the opposite direction. "Where do we go?" he shouted. "Rosie's house," I yelled back, staring out the back window at the red wave crawling after us. Faster, they were way faster than you'd expect a four-legged spider to be. "Oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God," Greg chanted, head in his hands. We drove as fast as we could, grateful that the rest of the town seemed to be asleep. "What if she's not up?" Ella cried. "She's awake," she had to be. There was no doubt in my mind that Rosie was awake. We just about took her fence off when we pulled up in front of her house. Max running up to the door and banging on it frantically while Ella, Greg and I tried to drag our things out of his truck. "Get the cooler," she shrieked, and we all started screaming and hollering for Rosie to let us in. It was like time stood still for a second. An ocean of furious creatures were closing in on us from one side, and the only safe place we knew was closed just inches from our faces. "Rosie. Jesus, someone look for a fake rock." Max was whipping apart her garden when the door finally opened and one Rosalie Walsh looked at us like we were dancing heads. "What in God's name are you kids doing here?" she cried, then stopped, peeked past us, and started hauling us inside. She slammed the door behind us, locking every lock and chain she had on it, then bracing it. We got inside just in time. It was like a storm hit her house. The sound of dozens of spiders landing on it at once sounding like an avalanche of hail. "Idiots. You idiots. What did you do?" she cried. Oh, we stood there, listening to what sounded like hundreds of angry reindeer on the roof. We thought we'd kill the spiders. Rosie wrapped her robe tighter around her body, staring at the ceiling. Then she looked slowly at each of us. Max let out an awkward laugh and Greg just ran for the bathroom. The woman closed her eyes, shaking her head as the sounds of scratching started in the chimney. "Damn stupid hecking kids," she muttered. "Are we going to die?" asked Max. "Only if you talk too much," she spat, going to a cabinet in the living room. "I don't know if this house can withstand all of them." She opened the cabinet, revealing an armory of guns. "You kids know how to shoot? Take a weapon. And you better start praying. I've never seen this before. Should have known though when you came bothering me. Welp. Now's as good a time as any to take a stand." She passed out guns, then went to her bedroom for her shotgun. "Just sit tight and..." The sound of smashing glass silenced all of us. Greg's screams followed, and we all ran out from the living room. We found Rosie standing in the hallway, staring at the remains of a small boarded-up window in the bathroom. Glass shards and splatters of blood laid on the floor. "The bars fell off a few years ago," she whispered, sounding haunted. "Couldn't get someone out to fix it." We were all in shock, and so was she. But the sounds of Greg's screaming snapped us out of it. "Not again," she shouted suddenly, and moved faster than I honestly expected a woman in her 80s could. Before we could even help her, she'd pried down the steps to the attic and was making her way up. "Get the bucket," she ordered, and Ella looked around, spotting a heavy Home Depot bucket in the hall and grabbing it. She carried it after Rosie while Max and I carried the cooler of Molotovs. We reached the roof just as Rosie had fired off her first shot, clipping a spider in the leg. Greg was already a house away, being dragged by a group of them across the snow and Christmas lights. "That's right, you nasty little pieces of nonsense," Rosie cried, ripping the top off the bucket. It was filled with bullets. "You're not taking any more on my watch. Come and get it." Ella shoved the gun she'd taken into my hands and opened the cooler, "Max, start lighting," she shouted, then took the first Molotov and tossed it as hard as she could. It hit one of the spiders, carrying Greg square in the body. The screech it let out burned my ears, but it dropped him. The others struggled to balance his weight, and Greg rolled off the roof into the bushes below. Suddenly, it was all-out war. I can't really say how long we were up on that roof. It felt like hours, maybe days, but with how late it was, I think it wasn't that long at all. Usually I wasn't so much as a bug squasher, but that night it was all I could do to keep firing off shots. It felt like they were never ending. Luckily, they were incredibly fragile. Ella rained down literal fire behind Greg as he made his way to safety, and the rest of us kept the spiders at bay on the roof. There were close calls. We all have weird scars that I don't think will ever go away, but we made it. The battle ended just as fast as it seemed to start. One minute we were watching those strange four-legged nightmares curling up into balls and falling to the ground, and the next they all seemed to just crumble away. We were all stunned. The onslaught had just kept coming, wave after wave, and now they were dust in the wind. "What time is it?" Rosie asked, and I fumbled for my phone. 12:01, I answered, then really thought about that. It was after midnight. Technically, it was Christmas morning now. Are they gone? We all hesitated, looking around at our quiet town, before putting down our weapons. Rosie just shook her head, suddenly looking drained, and stepped back into the attic. For a moment I felt a burst of exhausted excitement bubble up inside me. I could tell my friends felt it too. Max let out a small, soft woo and pumped his fist while Ella punched me in the arm. We grabbed the last of our supplies and made our way down through Rosie's house, talking the whole way. It was that nervous, excited chatter you did when something big had just happened. We were all tired. It was late. We still had so much to clean up. But we had defeated the spiders, and from the way they came at us, I doubted they had managed to divert any resources to stealing someone. It felt like we had actually managed to protect the town. Downstairs, Ella was putting the bucket back where she found it and helping Max to put the guns away, all while telling Rosie about how badass she was. We were gibbering at the woman all at once, at least until Ella made a noise that I didn't like. I looked over at her, crouched beside Rosie's recliner. "I think she's dead," she whispered, fingers to her neck. We all rushed over to check. We felt for a pulse, put Ella's compact beneath her nose, and tried CPR. But she was gone. "Maybe she had a heart attack," Max suggested as we all wiped away tears. "What do?" I grabbed the Afghan off the back of her chair and wrapped it around her. Then I set her favorite gun in that magazine pouch, just as she always had it. We cleaned up the glass and made sure the attic was locked. Then we picked up her phone and dialed 911. No one would be coming anytime soon, but we had to hope that the call would be logged somewhere, and it would happen. I made sure we grabbed Rosie's box of stuff before we left. Rosie had spent most of her life battling the nightmare that plagued our town. I didn't want all her efforts to disappear. We'd inherited it now, after all. It might have been Christmas morning, but it was so early that everyone but us was still asleep. After the battle we just had, it was amazingly peaceful to just walk down the street knowing we had the whole place to ourselves. Of course, the first place we went was to see the tree in town square. I couldn't help but feel nervous walking up. We hadn't directly seen it, but were pretty sure the spiders had come from the tree. So when we walked up and saw the formerly green tree had turned brown, we were elated. The tree looked like the crappy trees people threw out at the end of the season. Ornaments had started to fall off. Even as we stood there, a few baubles hit the ground and broke. We also noticed we couldn't hear Max's music mix playing anymore and made our way back to my house. The one thing I'm thankful for is that it snowed incredibly heavily. We always have snow on Christmas, but the weather this year was crazy. With how overboard we went on the gasoline, we were lucky that the weather was so bad that the massive fire at the Smith's house didn't spread. Instead, it was one big black smoky smoldering mass when we returned. We cleaned up the cables still connected to my house, shoved Max's leftover equipment into his truck, and then said goodbye. Max took Greg and Ella home, and I went upstairs to sleep. This year I woke up on Christmas feeling happy. When I looked outside at the Smith's house, I felt relieved. I played the What Did Santa Bring Us game with my sister and watched her dive into her presents while our parents stood at the window, frozen, staring outside at the mess across the street. It didn't take long for the gossip train to run, and as we were eating this year's slightly burned feast of cinnamon buns and eggs Benedict, my mother sat there in shock, listening to one of her friends talk about the tree going brown. I heard my parents talking about it in hushed whispers, and for once the local police actually came to visit the house across the street. It's been a few days since Christmas Eve. I've slept a lot, trying to use up what winter vacation I have left to catch up on a year of bad sleep. I've made notes of my own in Rosie's notebook, organized the box, and wrote out everything you saw here. Ella checked on Rosie's place and said a neighbor told her that the paramedics came and broke down the door. We expect to see her kids coming into town any day now. As for the town itself, things are strange. People panicked when they saw the tree went brown. I mean full-scale, weeping in public panic. The mayor's office tried to declare a state of emergency, but when pushed for why had to roll it back. Yesterday my mother received a call canceling this year's New Year's Eve party flower order. Budget cuts. Honestly, I wish I could say that I feel like this is the end, but Greg made a really good point when we talked after Christmas. There's still one tree standing back at Raleigh's tree farm. I think we're going to have to find a way to destroy it. I just don't know when or how. Plus, I'm certain we've pissed something off. Something, or someone, on the other side of that circle, is going hungry this year. For now, though, I'm just going to stay home and sleep. I don't think I can deal with any more crazy spiders this year. That's the end of the story. If you have hooked up till here, then hit like button and comment down your views. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet, then do support me by subscribing, so you may not miss any video in future.